Well, thank you for having me, I guess. I've missed CPC, to be honest. I've been in Nairobi for 2 years. And I've kind of been, people have been wondering where I am here. Clara Barrington still hasn't seen me and she keeps sending me texts every week. Just down the road, and it's been a hectic reintegration, but it's great to be back. And it was great to be there as well. So I want to talk to you about our Malawi project. Um, what I put all these folks here and I'm missing people, but I wanted to really emphasize that this is a very big project. There's a huge team. Everyone is really pitching in and doing a lot of work on this, and I wanted to make sure as much as possible that everyone gets credit. A lot of what I'm going to show is stuff that graduate students have been working on as part of their PhD dissertations. Of course, we've got this huge team as well. And as I'll explain in a sec, this is really a CPC flavored project, and I'll explain why as we go through. This works. May not. Right.
I know the trick. Not the trick. All right. So
Let me make sure I turn it on. Oh, yeah. Okay, we have a light. All right. I guess I'll. Back here. How about that? Okay.
there you go.
So the other thing is that I have a bunch of slides. I will not be talking through each and every slide. I just figured it's nice to have everything in one place. I think the slides will be available. So you could always go back and look at stuff that I'm not going to be able to present, but I just wanted to get everything into one PowerPoint for my kind of own purposes as well. The project, or this particular study, is part of the transfer project. We have a website here at CPC. Please look at it. Essentially, what we're doing is we're working with governments in Africa to understand the effects of their cash transfer programs. Here I want to emphasize that we only work with governments. We do not do anything ourselves. This is not about investigator-led small RCTs and stuff like that. Everything we do is policy-oriented and with government. So there are some, from an academic point of view, there are obviously some drawbacks to that, right? We can't obviously always design the perfect study. We can't control implementation. It's like the real world. That's what we work in. So a lot of the question, hopefully that will preempt some questions about, well, did you try this and did you try that using government programs? Now, the other thing is that this research collaboration is with obviously UNC here at CPC, but it's really led by UNICEF, who are the main kind of development partners in this area in Africa. And then the FAO is also a key partner of ours because they come in on the productive side of things. So you can see, look at more stuff on the website. And I don't want to, again, I could do a whole talk about social protection in Africa and what it looks like now and what the issues are. But here I just want to quickly motivate you by saying that this is a kind of snapshot of countries and their social protection programs, and you can see that basically every single country in and when I say country, I mean government, right, is running a cash transfer program, okay, typically targeted. Many countries do have public works programs. Those tend to be in West Africa or the Sahel, and they're very tiny programs. In terms of budget, the big budget in terms of social protection is on social pensions. The reason is that the sort of richer countries, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Lesotho, Mauritius, they have very large social pensions that are universal. So if you actually break down the spending in social protection in the region, the number one item is social pensions, even though it's just 12 countries. The second item is cash transfers. 30 years ago, the big ticket item would have been food-based and in-kind programs, right? So there's really been this shift, what we call the quiet revolution in social protection. So that's just some background, just to say that this is quite an important topic. It's very relevant, Paul. So let's go into Malawi now, which is going to be the focus of our attention. So the program there that we're studying is the national, it's their flagship social protection program. It's called the Malawi Social Cash Transfer Program, the SCTP. It reaches about 1.5 million people, about 10% of the population, but it's currently expanding a little bit. They're trying to get to 15%. So it's an interesting kind of period there. Eligibility at the time that we were doing the study was based on ultra poverty and this high dependency ratio idea, which I'll talk about in a bit. But they're currently transitioning to a categorical targeting approach, meaning they're looking at categories: disabled, elderly, young kids, and so on. In terms of the transfer amount, it's about roughly $8 per month, which represents around 15 to 20% of consumption of the household, if that's maybe a better way to think about it, right? And it does vary by household size and so on. So it's a very typical program in Africa, right? It's targeted, it has a poverty criteria, it has a demographic criteria. The transfer amount is about what most countries are paying, right? So in that sense, there's a lot of external validity, I think, to studying this program. Here's a photo, because we gotta have photos. This is payday. You can see that in this particular case, money is changing hands like actual physical cash. You can see that most of the recipients are women. You can see that. The men are sitting here waiting their turn, but there are very few men who are actual recipients. And we have the folks with guns making sure that everyone is safe. So this is what a payday looks like. Folks are paid every 2 months. So this is a little bit cumbersome, but anyway, it is what it is. Impact evaluation. So our kind of story, if you will, starts way back, I guess that's more than 10 years ago. That's incredible. But way back in 2013, the program was expanding. And at that time, they commissioned a study. And we won the bid for the study. So we designed this cluster randomized trial in 2 districts. We were able to do an RCT because they were scaling up, and the scaling up was sort of gradual. And so we were able to design something where, in any case, some households would be delayed entry just because of operational reasons. And so by kind of randomizing who would be delayed entry and early entry, we were able to design something pretty rigorous. So that original cluster randomized trial had about 3,500 households. We were in these 2 districts, and about half were randomized to this delayed entry status. The fidelity of the design was excellent, and we've published lots and lots of papers on that original study. Here's just a snapshot of them. A lot of dissertations here as well, which is nice. But basically what we've shown through that kind of suite of papers is that the program really had a transformative effect on households on all dimensions: on kids, on consumption, on debt, on productive activities. So really quite transformative. And the program has subsequently continued to be scaled up, right? There's a photo. Like I said, I'm going to spend more time on some slides. Some slides I'm just going to brush through. So don't be worried about that. Here's the map. These are the 2 districts. Magochi, Salima. There's Lake Malawi. And these are kind of the clusters. Okay, so this is like a kind of a summary of what we found in the original study. So what we've done here is, and this was published a couple of years ago again, we're kind of summarizing all the effects of the program in one graph is what we've done. I mean, behind this graph are like almost 50 indicators, right? So, we have a suite of indicators on food security, and we created a domain index. We had a bunch of indicators on assets, we created a domain index, and so on and so forth, right? And so these are kind of like our domain indices. These are all measured in standard deviation units. And you could see that this program really had an amazing effect on the household, right? So the only place we don't actually find positive and significant effects are on nutrition. I mean, the effects are positive. They're just not that, well, they cross zero, that confidence interval. But look at this. I mean, food security, almost over a 0.6 standard deviation effect on food security. Consumption, close to a 3.8, 0.38 or 0.4 standard deviation effect. These are very nice effects. These are some of the largest effects of cash transfers that have been reported anywhere. So very exciting results. And like I said, the paper was published in 2022, but the dissemination to government started in 2016, 17. I mean, we had lots of dissemination and dialogue with government about the results. That led to scale up, more kind of development partner support for the program. It survived a couple of transitions in terms of elections, which is always a big, an important sign as well. So that's where we were back then. Okay. And that's kind of like the background for what I'm going to now present to you. Okay. The other thing that we kind of found is that we did this study where we tried to estimate a multiplier effect, right? And what we found was that households are able to convert the money they got into an additional, so each kwacha received, they were able to convert into, 2.9 kwacha worth of additional spending, right? So that also is a very big effect, you can imagine, kind of on the domestic policy side, because, it kind of responds to the perennial criticisms about laziness and, dependency and stuff like that. So folks were very, very efficient with the money, right? And basically they were moving out of casual labor and onto their own farm, increasing investments on their own farm, reducing debt, increased savings. This is where this kind of multiplier is coming from. Okay, now, the other issue that's going on in Africa today, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, around social protection is this idea of graduation, right? Many of you may have heard of this NGO called BRAC from Bangladesh that's really pushing this idea. And so this has caught the infatuation of policymakers. Can we somehow leapfrog actual development and provide like these short-term, high impact kind of interventions on households and leapfrog them into the middle class? That's the idea of graduation. And graduation is a big issue now because more and more, governments are saying, well, do these programs lead to graduation? And of course, there's an inherent problem there because the programs are about protection. So, okay, what are the implications for graduation? Well, a couple of reminders. These households are living on 32 cents per person per day. They are literally the poorest households in the world, right? If you multiply that by 3, you get them up to, well, 2.9. You get them up to like 82, 90 cents per person per day. They will continue to be some of the poorest households in the world, folks, okay? So yes, this multiplier is fantastic. Does it leapfrog them into the middle class? Definitely not. In addition, they're living in very harsh conditions. So, okay, why am I asking? Why am I saying all this? You'll see in a second. This is a kind of profile of what the households look like in terms of their demographics. And you can see when I talk about high dependency, right? You can see that there are very few kind of so-called able-bodied or prime-age adults. There are a lot of grannies up here, and you could see that these households are very female-oriented as well, right? The white bars are women or females, and black bars are, and they are basically, grannies are basically caring for orphans is the situation in these households. Okay, so there are very few prime age. So it's hard to imagine these households somehow kind of, I don't know, jumping into the middle class, right? They're very kind of vulnerable households. Just to kind of underscore that, these are some comparisons of the characteristics of households in the program with like the rural poor in Malawi, pulled from national data. So look, I mean, they tend to be, more widowed-headed households. The head is more likely to have no schooling. They're caring for an orphan. A third of the households are caring for orphans, right? Compared to just, under 3% among the rural ultra poor. Okay. Malawi. More likely to be disabled, more likely to have a chronic illness, right? So you could see that, in fact, literally in Malawi, they refer to these households as, I'm serious, this is not my language, all right? In Malawi, they're referred to as non-viable households. So they are targeting a very particular type of households, and yet there's this tension about, can they graduate out of poverty? It's really something. It's really something. Cognitive dissonance or something, right? Okay, that was all the background. Now, what's the new study? So we followed this study up. We followed up the study sample through a grant that we got from NIH, which is ending pretty soon, actually. And for the aims of the grant, I really want to talk to you about the work under this new kind of grant. So the first aim was, okay, the control group entered the program in 2016, right? Remember the early treatment group entered the program in 2013. So we're talking about a 3-year delay in cash received. So did that 3 years of cash confer any permanent advantage? And I've already set you up for the question, for the results, right? I've already said, hopefully, if you were paying attention, you kind of figure out what the results are for that. And then the second question were, are there any effects on the immune system? And now this is where I want to talk about the fact that why this is such a CPC, like, research project, because actually, Barbara in her infinite wisdom decided that she was going to take these pairs of fellows who she thought ought to be working together. And Barbara was going to go force them to have coffee.
Indeed.
Right? And I don't know if you actually paid for the coffee. I don't think you even paid. So anyway, so there's this, Allison Aiello, how do I even pronounce that? So then we meet somehow over in Billings. Yeah, I didn't even know her. So it's like, are you Allison? Okay, so we had coffee, we exchanged ideas, and then I think he forced us to present at this little workshop. Like 6 little, it was like the newlywed game. Of us. And here we were, we had to present our little ideas about how we would collaborate. And so there we were, Allison and I. And it turns out that we actually had some fruitful areas where we could collaborate. So at the time when we did that little workshop, Barbara, we had actually already submitted an R21. And the R21 barely missed getting funding. And we said, well, dang, that's pretty good. So let's go for the big one. So we went for the big one, and it got funded. And here we are, several years later. But yeah, so in that sense, it's a really nice, I think, example to present today. I will also mention Bob Hummer, because I wrote Hummer into reading the proposal and giving us like a referee, like an NIH style critique, So I roped him into that, and he gave us excellent critique. Oh my God. I mean, we really revised the proposal based on Bob's comments too. So it was really, it's like such a team effort, to be honest. So, okay, what else? Anyway, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because Allison and I often talk about that fateful coffee. And listen, folks, I mean, gosh, during COVID, I'll talk about this, we collected close to 6,000 dried blood spots as part of this thing. And the Susanna here, I think aged like 10 years in that period, because we did this like very intensively and during COVID. And wouldn't have been able to do it without Susanna sticking with us and not quitting. And then the third aim was to look at the kids, the adult, those kids who were entering young adulthood, and to see what the long-term impacts were on them. So that's what the R01 is all about. And so what did we do? We did a follow-up survey of the households in 2021. We were supposed to do in 2020. COVID hit, everything ground to a halt. So we had to delay for a year. Even then, it was really hard. We were under COVID protocols. And then we went back and re-interviewed the young adults who were 13 to 19 to baseline, but then 9 years later, they were 21 to 28. And that was a bit of a challenge as well. But it was really, really fun times. We got through COVID. We did the interviews. We collected these blood spots. Oh my goodness. It was crazy. So let me kind of give you some of the results. All right. So there's the usual stuff. Was there attrition? Was it selective? And so on. We've taken care of that. So just kind of trust me on that. All right. The balance is preserved. Here's the balance table to show that, the households that we got, the 91% of households that we were able to re-interview, that they didn't differ according to original treatment and control status. That's important for measuring causal effects of the treatment. So looking at aim 1, all right, did the additional 3 years of cash confer any benefits? Here's the photo before I give you the results. Do we know what this is? It's the most popular one. It's a very popular non-farm enterprise. These households.
Brewing beer?
Why did we know that Clark would know? I should have said everyone except Clark. Okay. Yes, in fact, these are home breweries. But basically you use the crappy corn, the corn that you don't eat. You could use it to brew this really harsh stuff. So that's what folks do. And that's an easy non-farm enterprise. So I collect photos of these, by the way. So I'm going to show you so here, remember I told you like there are all these indicators that go behind the domains. So here are some examples of the indicators that we've used behind the domains, like to create the domains. And here what I want to point out is that in just a couple of cases, we don't have the baseline. So for those, we're going to do single difference impact estimates in 2021 and compare them to the impacts that we see in 2015. But for most of these, we have baseline, so we're going to do a double difference for that. So these are some of the indicators. Everything is in z-scores, and everything is like the z-score is calculated against the mean and standard deviation of the control group. So it's against the control group. This is pretty standard stuff now. That's how everyone is kind of doing these reporting of impacts. So let's get to the results. So in orange is the graph that I showed you already, which were the impacts at 2015 of the program. Okay. And basically what we did was we just replicated that analysis using the 2021 data. That's it. And you could see, and that's the green. Okay. And you could see that by the time we get to 2021, none of the original impacts persist. All of the impacts have disappeared. Okay. And again, I had kind of foreshadowed that, right? Now, I will note that most of the point estimates are positive, meaning that the original treatment group seems to continue to have a small advantage, right? Particularly if you look at like consumption and, food security, but, maybe stuff here. But by and large, the effects have disappeared. Right? And if you dig a little closely, right, this is a little bit of a difficult graph. Let me try and walk you through it. But let's just look at consumption over time. So here we are at baseline. The two groups are balanced more or less, right? Then you would come to 2 years later and you see the separation between the treated and the control, right? Treated is green. right? So this is like the 0.35 standard deviation impact that I showed you previously. Then you get to 2021 and notice that everyone, this is all in real terms, okay? So it's all real guacha. Everyone has got better. And it looks like the control group has improved such that this separation is no longer statistically significant. Okay. If I go down to, did you ever, never worried about food in the last 4 weeks? Again, baseline is balanced. Then you get to 2015, you see this huge separation, right? And that was the big effect that I showed you, the 0.65 standard deviation effect I showed you. So there you see that there. And then everyone is sort of improving, but the control group has obviously shot up, right? And they've essentially caught up. That's kind of the story. The story is one of everyone sort of getting better, but the control group catching up to the treatment group. That's the story here. You can see that, for example, in agricultural tools, these shoot up, but again, the initial separation has kind of gone away. Same with livestock. The initial separation, the impacts at 2015 essentially disappeared, not because the treatment group is getting any worse. They're still receiving the cash, right? But the control group is caught up. So that's the story here. And I think the way I set it up, I think you understand why this is probably kind of, predictable, because those households kind of, there's only so much I think that they can do given their resources and given their context. So I think that this was not a big surprise, but it does have some important policy implications because of this issue of graduation and this idea that, people are asking in Malawi and Zambia and Kenya and other countries, well, what are these programs doing for graduation? And the answer is, well, they're not meant to graduate, right? They're consumption support. And so this is a battle that's going on right now, this kind of fight for understanding what these programs are meant. Yeah.
Just clarification.
Yes.
So the control group, they were just delayed. They're all in the
Right.
cash program
Yeah.
now. Okay, so they're all improving, and the difference is just that 1 year difference in
3 year.
a 3 year difference in an initiation. Thank you.
And so we're trying to figure out, does that 3 years lead to some sustained improvement, right? But it looks like not really. Yeah, exactly. Let me go through, all right, 12:30. All right, there's a bunch of other stuff. We've done some heterogeneity stuff. I'm going to skip over that for now because there's so much other stuff I want to talk to you about. And really what I want to, I want to kind of now give you, so those are like, that was aim 1. I want to kind of take you through a little bit of some highlights of aims 3 and aims 2, right? Just so you get a flavor of what kind of work we're doing. I think, for the trainees in particular, I think it's nice to kind of see what everyone is working on, particularly other trainees, so that you can then follow up if you have mutual interests and stuff like that. So let me jump to aim 3 now, because a lot of the aim 3 work, well, all the aim 3 work is actually happening right here, this building. So remember, for aim 3, the idea was, what are the next generation effects? What are the effects on the kids who are now young adults, right? The transition to adulthood. So at the baseline, way back in 2013, we fielded this youth module. We refer to it as the youth module, but essentially we picked up to 3 residents aged 13 to 19. And we administered, face-to-face kind of survey around the usual stuff that you ask kids, right? Romantic partners, mental health, stress, other stuff, schooling, stuff like that. So we asked that, and we administered that in 2014, 2015. And then we went back in the 2022 NIH funded survey. We went back and tried to find them. Okay, 2022. And by then they were this age, right? They were 22 to 28. So they're in the young adult category. From our initial roster at the baseline, so we wanted to only find kids who were at the baseline, because some kids moved in 2014, 2015. And we didn't want to interview them. We wanted to only focus on folks that we had pre-intervention data on. We had 3,000-ish on our listing, and we managed to interview 2,000-ish, so about 71%. Is that good? Is that bad? We were more likely to interview women, and we were less likely to interview those who had moved out of the village. Obviously, that all makes sense, right? And it turns out that men are more likely to move farther away. And that explains why, in the end, we actually interviewed more women than men.
Did you try to follow people out of the village?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We followed. But basically, that's what we.
Yeah.
And we did have obviously funding limitations. There's only so much time you can spend out in the field hunting folks down. Now, there is no differential attrition. Obviously, that there's general attrition, meaning that of the original 3,000-ish, the ones we found are not representative of the 3,000. That's general attrition. But is there differential attrition between treatment and control? And the answer is no, which is good because that helps us with the causal inference side of stuff. So again, this is one of the many millions of tests that you can do to check for differential attrition. People are inventing new tests every single day. We don't have enough tests to check for differential attrition, apparently. But here's one of the many tests, for each of your outcomes, estimate this regression with the treatment dummy and see if the treatment dummy is significant. All right, so testing for mean differences, no differences across treatment and control in baseline characteristics of the sample that we got in 2022. Two of these variables are not baseline. One is the highest grade completed. The other is whether or not you're in a new household, which was informative. But by and large, so, the balance is maintained, but the sample is a little bit different from what we started with. But the balance between T and C is maintained. Okay, let me give you some, just a highlights tour of some of the stuff that's going on now and some of the initial results. There's really interesting stuff going on. And at some point, we have to sit down and kind of make sense of it all. So let's start with Audrey. This is her dissertation. She is focused on intimate partner violence and relationship quality. So in the study, we introduced these two, actually Audrey's the one who did this, introduced this relationship flourishing scale and this dyadic trust scale. So she did the kind of background work on that and came up with those. And we had an IPV module as well. Okay, where we measured, all three dimensions of IPV. So those are kind of the measures. Now, this is interesting. There's Audrey. Audrey this morning in London was at a cash transfer and IPV research initiative run out of LSE. And she's there because this sub-study is kind of funded by them. And there she is presenting these results this morning. London. Look, the Malawi Barrington is there too, asking, "Where's Ashu? Can I?" Yeah, I think she may have thought I was going to show up there. Anyway, I thought it was kind of cute. I was here and she was there presenting on some of the same stuff. So, and actually, there's some former UNC folks here. I think this is Amber Peterman. She's also part of the UNC Mafia. Claire's there, Tia's there. So anyway, it's a fun group. So, so what are some of the results here? And again, I'm not going to go into the details. I want to kind of just give you a broad stroke of what we're finding. Okay. So what are we finding on relationship quality and IPV? So first of all, let's look at IPV. We don't actually see any impacts on reduced exposure to IPV in this sample. So that's the first thing. Okay. And that's not necessarily a surprise, but anyway, what we do see is that there are some positive impacts on kind of relationship quality, but they're concentrated in women. Okay, so in particular, you can see that in these dimensions of benevolence, which is part of this relationship trust component. And then on this relationship flourishing scale, right? So, this is this 12-item flourishing scale, and then this trust scale is split into benevolence and honesty. And so you can see that on the benevolence subcomponent and then on relationship flourishing, we do see some positive impacts. And we've looked, and Audrey has looked at whether there's kind of differences in partner type and stuff like that. We haven't found much on, this kind of, okay, are you selecting different partners with different characteristics, and this is the reason. We have looked at mediators, and one of the most important mediators is this depression index. So we see big positive effects of the program on adolescent mental health, depression in 2015. And that's a big mediator, meaning that if you did well here in 2015, then it looks like you were in a better relationship in 2021. We also collect the CSD in 2022. It's a little bit tricky because it's not, you don't have the temporal precedence, right? It's measured at the same time. But it seems to persist. So this is an interesting pathway, right, for the effect. So something to think about on that. So anyway, that is just a quick snapshot of what Audrey's working on with these data. Let's move quickly now to what Dardani's working on, and Dardani's right here in this room, actually. So she now is working on these so-called non-cognitive characteristics. So what we did was in this survey, we collected this short item Big Five inventory, which is kind of a cool thing that people are now implementing. And it's like 20, if you've gone to these leadership things, you've done the Big Five, and it takes you like days and days, and it's got thousands of questions. Somehow they've got it down to 20 questions. Okay, don't ask me how. But anyway, but it's been used quite a bit and it's been validated. So we introduced this Big Five 20-item question. We also have grit and agency, other stuff, locus of control, but really focus on Big Five because there's really been nothing done on this, right? In our context, and then the effects of the cash transfer. Now, why would that even move, right? Now, there definitely is research suggesting that aspects of personality are malleable, okay? Especially during adolescence. And if you remember back in the high school days, oh my God, I started out in 9th grade and I was this kind of person, and by 12th grade, I was that kind of person, right? So yeah, I think it makes sense. And certainly context, school environment, family environment are very important in terms of influencing those kind of characteristics. And I guess that's why they're called non-cognitive. But the results are really, really interesting. I don't know what you'll think of this, but these are just kind of the means. Here you've got males versus females. And this is the Big Five inventory. And then these are the components, right? The 5 components of the Big Five. It kind of makes sense, right? That, females are scoring, worse or less than men on the extroversion and the openness. And then on these, they're about the same. But the overall, scale seems to be much higher for men than women, right? And if you look over here at the treatment effects, well, differences by treatment status, should I say. Again, you could see that those who were exposed to early treatment score much higher on the scale. And then that seems to be driven by this conscientiousness, openness, and I guess agreeableness subcomponents, right? And these stand up to the regression analysis. So these are the effects when you put it in a multivariate framework. So these are the treatment effects. So you can see, and again, there's standard deviation units, so positive effects of the treatment on the overall score, and they're driven, as I said, by conscientiousness. And then there continue to be differences by sex, right? So women are scoring significantly lower on the inventory, and that's driven again by extroversion, openness. And Dottie has done some fixed effects where we've taken kids who are from the same household so we can control for household time invariant stuff. And the results stand up to the fixed effects as well. That suggests that I guess it's not necessarily household level things that are driving this. So maybe it's environment stuff. Anyway, still a little work to do to understand those, but really interesting and really the first estimates looking at these dimensions for like a national social protection program. They're pretty exciting. And then we have Marwa. She just graduated actually, but she looked at mobility of young people. And so again, here we're talking about a context that's very harsh. And so really one of the main ways to kind of, improve your living standards is to get out of there, right? To get out of that context, move to a town, to a city. And so can this cash transfer facilitate that, right? So that's what Marwa was looking at. The answer is yes. And so these are just kind of a lowest graph of probability of moving out of the household by age. And this is baseline age. Okay. So by 2021, 22, these are obviously older folks, but we're able to track mobility from the baseline through the rosters. So this is not just the 2022 survey. It's all the way since since the baseline. So the sample size is quite big. So the average treatment effect, 5.5 percentage points, meaning that those kids living in treatment households were about 5.5 percentage points more likely to move out of the house. The treatment effects are larger for women. So these are women, these are men. You can see that for men in particular, the program sort of extends like the period where they are kind of mobile. See that? So like the larger effects are at the older age group. So that's the kind of the effects for men. And then there's Marwa does some interesting kind of heterogeneity analysis. It shows that the treatment effects are larger in communities that have a lower share of migrants, meaning somehow the cash is like a substitute, right? Because usually we think if you have social networks that facilitates migration, but it looks like cash is somehow substituting for that or helping you overcome the lack of networks locally. And then she also finds that the treatment effects are actually larger in households who are relatively less poor. Remember, all these households are ultra poor, right? But this suggests that there's like some minimal threshold of income that you need to actually finance and move. Okay, so in the last few minutes, let me talk about AIM 2. So AIM 2 is the effect of income support on the immune system. We collected all these dried blood spots during COVID. Susanna here managed that whole process and wrote a blog actually for CPC. So there's the blog post. Here's some photos. We had to do all kinds of stuff to do this in the field. It was really, really something, but we had to build these little boxes to, it's very dusty out there, right? So we had to build these boxes to immediately kind of protect the cards from the dust. These are the little pails that the numerators use, the nurses use. So immediately they collected the spots, then they put them in these little kind of, I think it's like a fishing tackle box or something. And then we got them into here. Then we had to rush them into the hotel in the local district capital to get them in the fridge. And then eventually we had to get them to Lilongwe to the UNC projects where they had a deep freeze. And eventually they made their way to Chapel Hill. What a process. Okay, very quickly, what are we finding? We're finding that everyone has HSV and CMV. Everyone, 100% of the sample, whether it's older adults or their young adult kids, 100%. And for CRP, it's like 95%. Like everyone is seropositive. And so, I think that is in itself is a pretty big result because, we talk about these diseases of the poor, right? These are latent kind of viruses that sit there and they drain on your immune system and make you lethargic and they pop up every now and then and set you back. they're never talked about in the context of these populations. It's always about, we hear about them in the US, these additional issues that the poor face that we don't see. But wow, so that is something that I think, we're writing up these results, and I think that we can make a big splash with these because it will get it onto the agenda now for people to think about, right? About these additional burdens that people are facing. And then, what happens when Barbara forces you to have coffee with someone you've never met? We put in another grant. We roped in this guy, Belsky, a colleague of Allison's at Columbia, and we just got funded actually recently to look at these biological aging measures that Dan in particular is like, an expert in. So we're going to use these blood spots that we've collected and look at these biological kind of aging and match it up with actual aging and match it up with the health data that we've collected to see what that looks like. So that's pretty exciting stuff. So maybe the big conclusion is if Barbara says go have coffee with someone, don't complain about her not paying for the coffee. Fork out the $3 and who knows, it might change your entire life. Okay. Some conclusions. I don't know. We're almost, so like I said, for AIM-1, we finished that main paper. We're going to be looking specifically now moving to physical health and cognitive functioning because we collected those data as well. Haven't had time to look at those. For AIM-2, like I said, we've got those results that I think we can publish, and then we have a PhD student, Juba, who has started to look into the hypertension data. Juba is actually from Malawi and helped us in some previous studies that we did in Malawi okay. And then again, what I consider to be very promising evidence of these intergenerational effects, which are much needed because there's just a lot of, it's like riding a bike with these programs. You got to keep riding, pedaling and defending them and explaining why they're useful. And so I think these second generation effects are going to be very useful for that policy dialogue in country. All right. That's all I've got for you. Thank you very much. Photo of
Recent photo. Yeah.
hat here. Okay, how do we do this?
We just
People ask
have
questions.
Q&A.
What do we?
10 minutes or so.
Okay, are you moderating that?
I can, but you can too, whichever you want. Do you have a question?
Always.
You want to know where to go and get the beer?
Exactly.
GPS.
So if someone was going to benefit from 3 years of early exposure to the transfer, I feel like little kids would be the obvious candidates. But I know that it looked like from the age histogram that it's mostly older kids in this sample. So I don't know if that's something you can look at or not.
Yeah, that's it. In fact, I failed to kind of mention that when I put that up. But yeah, the nature of these households is that they're really mostly like teenagers. Well, this is, I think, baseline data. So, but yeah, the targeting is such that you don't actually get a lot of 0 to 5s. So in the initial study, UNICEF was the sponsor. They insisted on collecting data on 0 to 5s, even though I sat there and said, it's not the target group for that, but there's like, no, we're going to do it. And so actually the benefit of that was that they paid for a larger sample size. But in the NIH follow-up, we didn't even collect anthropometry on these folks.
You have maybe like educational attainment, migration, and that kind of thing for those kids.
Yeah, I guess we can focus on the younger kids and look at their like if you were exposed in this window. Yeah, we could do that, sure. Good. Yeah. All right. Let's go there and then there. Yeah.
Just following up on this idea, I thought the findings with the 13 to 19-year-olds are really fascinating because they suggest kind of a sensitive period, right? Because everybody got it. The fact that it's a delay means that once you left that 13 to 19 window, it didn't have the same effect. And so I wonder then you could maybe, if you have enough of a sample size, even unpack within the 13 to 19-year-olds. I would guess that maybe the 13-year-olds had a stronger effect than the 19-year-olds, but I find that really compelling because that evidence of these sensitive windows is really messy. So
That's been our framing for this, both to the NIH and the subsequent papers. Audrey has looked at it. She has cut it by age group and found larger effects on the relationship stuff for the older at that time. And her idea was that that's when they are actually more likely to be forming relationships, right? So the 17, 18, 19-year-olds, she found larger effects on relationship quality 9 years later. So that was her finding. We haven't looked, Dotney, I don't think we've looked at the age things, but we should do that probably. But yeah, I think that's a useful comment, yeah.
I actually had a two-part question, and that was the second part of it. So the first part is much less interesting, but I was curious about it's an age question too, but the preliminary data that you presented prior to your R01 showed no impact on child nutrition. And then I was kind of curious what that measure was and sort of why, if you saw improvements in consumption and food security, why you didn't sort of move the needle as much on child nutrition. I was curious if it was a stunting or was it some other measure?
Well, we actually, in that particular case, we just combined all three. But we have looked separately at the three indicators. We never found anything significant on those, and that's pretty normal for the cash transfer stuff. And we just, our understanding is that it's just so like the etiology is so complicated, right? You got the food, but you got the care, and then you've got the disease environment. There's only so much. So the programs are definitely affecting the one pillar, which is the food, but they're not affecting the care, disease environment. There's some disease environment, like, you do see some improvements in housing, but stuff like water, there's no messaging around hand washing, there's messaging around that. Whether or not you have water is more supply driven, tends to be more supply driven. So it's a difficult one, but it has led to a whole series of initiatives to layer on kind of these nutritional interventions onto the cash transfer programs. So that's been quite a useful initiative coming out of these findings.
So that graph is really interesting, and I'm wondering, it's a little dicey to subdivide your treatments, but I'm wondering if the households that have 0 kind of prime age adults versus those with maybe 1 are any different, like if there are any sort of spillovers. Yeah, it doesn't seem like your granny households are going to necessarily start businesses, but maybe that some of the ones with younger people would.
Yeah, we could look at like the dependency ratio maybe and see, or number of prime age. Some of the FAO work has looked at that, at whether the productive effects are more pronounced when you do have some prime age folks, and they have found that is the case actually. But we haven't really looked at it on the social side or the protection side. But yeah, good. We could look at it as well. Yeah.
I had a question about some of the psychological indicators that you collected. I don't know if you're at this stage yet of like your analysis or interpretation, but why would conscientiousness change?
I don't know. Do you have an answer?
I don't know.
You're rich enough to care about other people or
Yeah,
something.
no, really, yeah.
I don't know. Dotney, take note, please.
I mean, this is your own perception of your conscientiousness, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Think more highly of yourself.
Dotney, do you have any questions there?
Especially the men.
Like, what's the conscientiousness question?
When doing a task, are you very careful? And the other one is, do you prefer relaxation over hard work?
Oh, there you go. That's
And then the
Well,
third
which
is
puts you more conscientious?
hard work. I was like self-care, like.
In this context?
But you know that households are investing in small businesses, right? So maybe it's just that exposure to working. People say, I'm a harder worker.
It could be. There are impacts on non-farm enterprise, and I guess if you have more opportunity to do stuff, then it becomes more salient. That could be something to think about. Yeah. But if you have nothing to be conscientious about, then it might be harder to answer that question. Yeah, but even stuff like, yeah, why are you more, well, okay, I could see why you might be more agreeable, although there are no effects on that. Well, there's treatment effects on agreeableness. Yes, if you're not worried about money. Agreeable, right? Yeah, it's good. I think that we need to figure a little bit more out on why. Then even neuroticism, there are no effects on that particular component. But extroversion, I think, on the treatment side, it's really conscientiousness, right? It's the big one. Yeah. We'll have to dig
I
into
have
that. Yeah.
What about that? I think especially these shortened scales, the way the big five ends up, and the way you have it coded, sort of extroversion versus introversion, is that they really capture a little bit more engagement with the world. And sort of you have more bandwidth, more kind of cognitive reserve, more sorts of reserve, which is they all kind of fall like that, except the neuroticism one, which is different. So I was kind of surprised that it's even leaning that way, but they tend to capture that sort of more engagement with the outside worlds.
And then Barbara, yeah.
Did you also say that there were treatment effects on depression?
Yes, there.
So, I mean, because I think depression can, you may have looked at, but I think depression can really impact a lot of these behaviors as well.
Yeah. Actually, we should actually look at that for sure. Yeah. Barbara.
So I want to go back to that original paper, the foundational work, and
Yeah.
think about that. So I'm curious about your expectation. You have an intervention, and then you have, for others, it's delayed 3 years.
Yeah.
How long do you expect that difference to be there? Because, I mean, what struck me was both were moving up. It was just that they were converging a bit. And that had me wondering, like, how long of a differentiation would you expect? I mean, if I'm remembering right, it was 6 years at that point, right?
It's 3 versus 6, right? Yeah, so
Is that
they
what it
have
is?
6 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought it started in 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah,
6
so,
That's
so
right.
6 versus 9 years of exposure, if I'm getting it right.
Yes, that's
Right.
right.
So, how long
Uh-huh.
do you, I mean, talk to me about this.
Yeah, my take on that is that I think it's more the type of household rather than the period. And the period I think matters, yeah. But I think in this case, those households just have a ceiling based on their characteristics. I'm talking about disabled, chronically ill, elderly, widowed. It's like there's not like if I think about their forward-looking behavior and their time horizons, I think that it's probably not that long. So they're probably just living, not exactly day by day, but more in the short term. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I see that argument and is consistent with the data, but isn't it also consistent with the data that they're still moving up, just not as quickly? And I'm not saying that
Yeah.
there's gonna be a graduation anywhere, so I'm not, that's not where I'm going.
Yeah,
But it just is striking to me that it's all just sort of resting on how long of a distinction there's gonna be.
now we did this basically a similar study in Zambia where the program recipients are actually young households with young kids and lots of prime age members. And we also find catch up. And it is catch up. It's the same pattern. So that's why in that particular case, we're arguing that it's the context. And that folks just don't have access to markets. They're very isolated. And there's only so much they can do in that context. But if I'm so that one is about to get published. This one we're going to submit, but we're putting together a kind of body of evidence around these things about, and I think looking ahead, I think the story is going to be that there's only so much the cash can do, which we kind of all understand anyway, and that you do need complementary stuff.
So if you went back, next year,
Yeah.
you'd expected to see that have totally flatten out. So you're seeing not only the convergence, but the plateau.
That's a good one. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right, based on my theory. All right, we gotta go there, Paul, then we come back to you.
And then,
Yes.
yeah, and these will be the last two.
Thinking about the improvements in food security, I'm just wondering, in this ultra poor context, is this driven more by people using the money to produce more food or increasing the access to markets?
Both, yeah, but they're definitely moving out of casual work on someone else's farm and then investing in their own farm. So we clearly see productive effects, like own production. And there's more ability to purchase, particularly during the lean season.
Back to the convergence question. In every community I've worked in, these households are embedded in networks, through
Yeah.
kinship, exchange, all sorts of different things. So
Yeah.
what I would imagine that as one household benefits, or being earlier in treatment, whatever, that benefit could bleed out because they have more resources, they get tapped, they people call on them and so on from other households.
That's a great point. We need to look at the remittances aspect. We have the remittances data. That's a great point. Yeah. So
The
to
treatment randomized within villages or at the
No.
village level?
village level.
Okay.
But it could be that, yeah, we could see, it could be that the early treatment are more likely to remit or whatever. But that's something to look at. Certainly the qualitative work, which by the way is led by Claire, shows clearly the social cohesion feelings that these beneficiaries get. Like they feel suddenly I can show up, I can wash my clothes and I can show up to church, I can show up to the community meeting. I can contribute to the burial society, So you definitely see that in the qualitative work. So I think that's a good angle to pursue.
All right, well, thank you. That was.
Thank you.